Go ahead and think about the last time you heard a firework go off. Because that sound started as a failed attempt to live forever. There is a smell you would recognize instantly. Sharp, sulfurous, electric. The smell of something about to change the world. It is the smell of gunpowder. And almost no one knows where it actually came from. Because the people who invented it were not trying to kill anyone. They were trying to live forever. It is 800. A Tang Dynasty alchemist stirs a mixture over a slow flame. He is looking for the elixir of immortality, a potion that would grant eternal life to the emperor. This was not fringe science. This was state-sponsored research. China's most brilliant minds had spent centuries trying to crack death's code. They experimented with sulfur, charcoal, arsenic, mercury. They believed that the right combination of elements could unlock something divine. But on this particular night, something went very wrong. The mixture ignited. A flash of light, a burst of heat. The workshop caught fire. The alchemist survived. But what he had created was not immortality. It was gunpowder. The Chinese called it huo yao, fire medicine, an ironic name for something that would cause so much death. But in the beginning, it was not a weapon. The early uses of gunpowder were remarkably peaceful. Fireworks. The Chinese launched the first fireworks to scare away evil spirits. The loud crack, the sudden light. They believed it could drive away darkness. And then someone had a different idea. What if the darkness you wanted to drive away was an army? The first gunpowder weapons were crude, fire arrows, bamboo tubes packed with powder launched at enemy ships. The flames they caused were terrifying. But it was the sound that did something else entirely. It broke morale before it broke bodies. An enemy who has never heard gunfire before does not know what hit them. They only know that something invisible has come for them. And that is a different kind of terror. By the 10th century, the Song dynasty was fighting the Mongols. Outnumbered, outmaneuvered, but armed with something the Mongols had never seen. Bombs made of ceramic packed with gunpowder. Early fire lances, essentially the world's first guns. Rockets that screamed through the air. The Song dynasty still fell. But the Mongols remembered what they had seen, and they carried the knowledge westward. This is how ideas travel, not through books, through conquest. The Mongol Empire stretched from China to Persia to Eastern Europe. And wherever the Mongols went, so did gunpowder. By the 13th century, it had reached the Islamic world. Arab alchemists refined the formula. They called it the Chinese snow. They figured out that the ratio of ingredients mattered enormously. Too much sulfur, and the powder burned slow. Too much charcoal, and it barely burned at all. The sweet spot was a precise recipe. 75 parts saltpeter, 15 parts charcoal, 10 parts sulfur. A formula that would remain essentially unchanged for nearly 800 years. Europe heard whispers. Roger Bacon, an English monk writing in the 13th century, described a substance that could produce a noise and a flash of fire. He deliberately encoded the formula in an anagram. He was afraid. He understood what this meant. By the 14th century, Europe had figured it out, and the consequences were immediate. The cannon, a simple idea with a devastating outcome. You take a metal tube, you pack it with powder, you drop in a heavy stone or iron ball. You light the fuse, and you wait. The sound was unlike anything medieval Europe had ever experienced. The ground shook. The walls crumbled. Everything the Middle Ages had built its power upon. The castle, the fortress, the armored knight became obsolete almost overnight. For 1,000 years, the castle was the ultimate symbol of power. Thick walls, towers, moats. If you controlled the high ground and had enough food, you could hold out indefinitely. Sieges could last years. Armies would starve waiting outside. Gunpowder ended all of that. The cannon could bring down a castle wall in hours. Suddenly, the most expensive military investment in history was worthless. The feudal system, built on the logic of fortified estates and armored cavalry, began to unravel. Power shifted from the lord in his castle to the king with cannons. Centralized states became possible because centralized firepower made them necessary. The map of Europe was being redrawn, not with diplomacy, with powder and iron. But the cannon was only the beginning. The gun was next. A weapon small enough to be carried by a single person, accurate enough to kill at a distance. This changed war in a way the cannon had not. Because the cannon required a team, a wagon, weeks of preparation. The gun required one person and one decision. The armored knight who had trained for a decade, who represented a family's investment in war, could now be killed by a peasant with 6 months of basic training. The hierarchy of violence collapsed, and with it, the hierarchy of society. Gunpowder did not just change war, it changed who could wage it. Armies became larger because they had to. Guns could be mass-produced. Soldiers could be trained quickly. The age of the professional, mounted elite warrior was over. The age of the mass army had begun. And to fund these armies, kings needed money. To get money, they needed trade. To protect trade, they needed navies. To arm navies, they needed more gunpowder. It was a chain reaction. Gunpowder created the conditions for the age of exploration. The same powder that blew open castle walls pushed ships across uncharted oceans. Because a ship armed with cannons could claim a port, could demand tribute, could plant a flag anywhere it reached. Columbus sailed in 1492, Vasco da Gama in 1498, Magellan in 1509. None of these voyages would have been possible without the military confidence that gunpowder provided. You go into the unknown when you believe you can fight whatever waits there. And what waited there was everything. New continents, new peoples, new resources, and new conflicts. Gunpowder traveled to the Americas in the hands of conquistadors. Hernán Cortés had fewer than 600 men when he arrived in Mexico. The Aztec Empire had millions, but the Aztecs had never heard a cannon, never seen a musket. The sound alone broke formations. The smoke confused their warriors. An empire that had stood for centuries fell in 2 years. The same story repeated itself across 2 continents. Gunpowder did not just change the outcome of battles. It determined which civilizations would survive and which would not. This is the uncomfortable truth about discovery. It rarely stays neutral. An invention born in a Chinese alchemist's dream of immortality became one of history's greatest instruments of death. But history rarely moves in only one direction. Gunpowder eventually forced a reckoning. As warfare became more destructive, it also became more expensive. Wars that might have lasted a generation now lasted a decade. But the casualties were beyond anything medieval commanders had imagined. States that could not sustain these losses were forced to negotiate. International law began to develop. The idea that there were rules to war, rules that should limit its worst cruelties, grew partly out of the horror that gunpowder made possible. The very weapon that empowered conquest eventually contributed to the frameworks designed to restrain it. Today, gunpowder's original formula is still used in fireworks, in signal flares, in pyrotechnics that light up stadiums around the world. Every New Year's celebration, every Olympic opening ceremony, the light you see in the sky comes from the same basic chemistry that a Tang Dynasty alchemist stumbled upon over 1,000 years ago. He was looking for immortality. He did not find it for himself. But in an unexpected way, the discovery he made has never stopped burning. If you made it this far, consider subscribing to Idea to Discovery. Every video, we trace the moment a single idea, changed the direction of the world. The next story is already waiting, and you might not see it coming.